but I also desire more. I desire more financial freedom than I've allowed myself on the tail end of not having the disciplines early in life. I desire more depth in my relationships with my kids, with my wife. I desire more impact in the work that we do. And I don't understand why anybody in today's world would ever shame more. But there's a big difference between being unsatisfied and feeling incomplete or empty in your current state and always chasing that empty hole and recognizing that I am actually currently full, but tomorrow my capacity goes up. My lifeline is longer. I have more experience, more wisdom, more understanding. A year from now, 10 years from now, the same thing is true.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Brian Bogert, who will share his journey to an authentic life. Maybe you'll find some ways to make yours.
Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com.
I am always still amazed about how our guests come together and weave together. I met Brian at a Steve Sims program. Remember him? He was back on episode 374, Go for Stupid. He's the guy who is a wizard who can make your wildest dreams a reality. Brian and I sat down to dinner after the event. We're making our own pizzas and having a deep conversation about many of the topics we're going to chat about today. Brian starts inside with who you are. In a world that is disconnected, Brian is revolutionizing how individuals, leaders, and entrepreneurs deeply connect with their authentic selves to achieve the best version of themselves. When he was 7 years old, he faced a traumatic injury when he was run over by a truck and left his left arm severed from his body. After years of intensive rehabilitation and 24 surgeries, he now has a deep understanding of how physical, emotional, and mental pain can keep people buried, regardless of what the initial trauma was. He's a human behavior and performance coach, speaker, and business strategist. He disrupts the way things are done. We have to embrace the pain to avoid the suffering. And of course, like I always say, people before profits. That's what it's all about. Let's learn from him and see how he's done it. Welcome to Richer Soul, Brian Bogert. It's great to have you join us today.
Man, I'm happy to be here with you.
And I'm excited for the conversation. Always love to continue what starts in real life, ends up virtual. We always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would tell you school taught me very little about money other than we were one of the least wealthy families in the area we grew up in. And so school just provided a perspective, right? I mean, great example. When I was 16, I bought my very first car that I worked my ass off to save $4,000 for. And one of my best friends was bought a 700 series BMW when they were 16, right? And so the contrast and the perspective there is real, right?
Now, wait, time out. Did he buy it or did his parents buy it?
No. So it was a female, and her parents bought it.
Yeah, okay.
But that was the point. That was what I was trying to highlight. Is like, I'm earning and scrapping, but here's the reality. I never wanted or needed for anything growing up, so I largely would have told you that I was very privileged. But there was also a lot of historical elements of relationships with money that both my parents brought into my upbringing, right? My dad grew up extremely poor, like very, 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 very poor. And, all of his brothers were in and out of prisons and everything for their entire lives. And so why I highlight that is that, my dad was also one that often minimized his own value and worth. And I say this to him and to his face, but why do I highlight that? Because he was also somebody that reinforced, like, never talk about money. Like, we don't talk about money. We don't do these things. And instead of getting really comfortable and normalizing it, it was almost like it was a hush-hush topic, right? There was shame that was around it, or at least that's how I felt it, even though I know that's not how he intended it. But to give a real-time example, when I was 12, I wanted to get a stereo. It was beyond what I had as any type of allowance or earnings for grades. And so I started my own couple of businesses. I started picking up dog poop for a couple of years around the neighborhood, and it was simple and easy. And then around 12, I turned that into a landscaping business that grew ultimately until the time I was 16, which was awesome. But the very first client I had, there was about a 12-hour commitment that day that took to clean up. It had 18 35-gallon black trash bags full of yard debris. And I got paid, I think, $12, somewhere between $8 to $12. And when I got home, the message I got was, you got paid too much, go return some of it. And I literally did, right? I returned like $3 or $4 of it, right? And so it embedded this element in my belief system or even around value, is that even when I earned something could be taken away, right? The same thing would take place. My brother and I would babysit for the same families, and I would always get paid more. And I would get paid more because I asked for it, right? And they were willing to pay for it. And I was very confident and always very convicted in that. But then there were situations that it would lead to the fact that I would not be allowed to babysit for those families anymore. I'd have to, have the same rate that my brother would get, right? Or things like that. And so these were pieces that I highlight this because I had lots of financial success early in life, but I didn't really have a foundation for what that really meant, how to keep it, how to use it. And a lot of this came from those early experiences that shaped my beliefs. Again, none of that was malicious or intentional for my parents. They would have never done anything but want me to be stepping into all my value, all my worth. But these are just the reflections I have after years of understanding it and unpacking it, to the fact that these shaped my belief systems and my relationship with money for years.
Just so you know, you're not alone. About 90% of our guests didn't have great money learnings from their parents. And their parents didn't know any better, right? And the reality is, if you didn't know any better today, you'd be teaching your kids probably the same thing that your parents taught you, which is the same thing that they learned. And as you said, school doesn't do it. So where is that pattern going to change unless you have that spark or something kind of changes it for you? Mm-hmm. And I've always said, parents don't want you to be happy and successful. They want you to be safe and secure.
Yeah.
Right. and it's one of those things in life. You're like, damn, that's not good.
But that's exactly even what you and I talk about in some of the other conversations that we have, is right. The second that we protect ourselves or someone else protects us, we disconnect ourselves from who we are and what we want. And so you're exactly right. Like, the thing is it's messaged around happiness and success, but the actions and behaviors often communicate through a lens of security and safety, which is a protective energy. It's a guarded energy. It's armor. It's scarcity. Right. And so you're spot on in the way you described that. And it's exactly the way I was able to unpack it for myself, is to see that it's like, where am I protecting myself around money? Where did that belief system come from? Why is that what I've adopted and held true for so many years? Right. And it's how do we break those patterns is really the key question, like you said.
Very few people ask that question of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about your dad. Was there a different perspective from your mom?
I would say that it was different in the sense that she grew up not poor. She often described herself growing up like in the Brady Bunch family, right? And my grandfather was always, at least on the outside, very financially successful and had lots of social events and different things. So it was a very different upbringing But I think the root of a lot of what we're talking about here, whether it's tied specifically to money or not, is what is the focus on elevating self-worth within an upbringing in a household so that people even understand what their value is and how to negotiate and grab it within life. And so both of my parents had elements within their upbringings that fostered in what I would suggest to be these areas of shame that, again, were unconscious to them, that shape patterns and beliefs that could be perceived as limiting, right? Yet they both were very successful in their own right. And so it's very different contrast to my mom, but yet some of the same belief systems translated from a completely different upbringing, right?
It's funny. Well, let's start with the question. You have siblings?
I do.
Did they all grow up with the same money belief you did, or did they have different ones? Because you might go through the same situation and end up vastly different places. And it's clear that you did a much better job of selling than your brother did because you were getting more pay.
Here's what I would tell you. I think it's an actually very interesting pattern because you described it very, very well. I would tell you that he had the same money beliefs. He learned different approaches to use his money for him. And he learned a different level of financial literacy because he didn't have the same level of financial abundance early like I did. I had it caused a level of discipline and learning for him that my top line always outpaced, right? Meaning I was always making more and more and more and more, but I also was losing it just as fast or donating it just as fast. And these weren't things that I really knew then. But I would tell you that we had a reversal point at some place. And I think I will always better sell myself. But he has, I would tell you, a better foundation and understanding of financial literacy than even I do. And I consider myself pretty well versed. But it was out of need, right? In his ability to recognize early that the way that my parents were not how he wanted to be.
And we've noticed that as a pattern when we've had guests is a lot of times it's being in a situation for whatever reason, they come up with this thing that going, I don't want that. And so I'm going to go the opposite direction. And that's interesting. The other point, and this is one that I've only really started to appreciate in the last couple of years and the extent of it, especially in America, there's a lot of people who know how to make money. Clearly they can do that. There's very few people who have the skill of the ability to keep money. And that's a whole different skill set. And like you said, people can make tons of money and they can get rid of it even faster than they can make it. So that's a whole nother.
But it's true. And I fit into a couple of different categories of that. I was very financially successful very early. And so again, it gave me a lot of liberties. For lots of my life was in a position where it didn't matter what I spent, how much I spent. I always had enough and extra. And there were so many years through that routine that my wife and I actually donated more into the community from a philanthropic standpoint than we even did to save or invest for ourselves, which is something honestly I'm proud of, but I also see what the ripple effect of that had in our trajectory. Right? Coming from a place of good desire, heart, but also not really seeing the same levels of discipline on the other side, up to and including when I left that business and had what I'm going to say favorable exit, but not based on what I now know today, right? It could have been a lot better exit than it was. And in the midst of trying to grow new things, I risked and lost almost all of what I created before, right? And I say these things because it's important, I believe, for us to be able to normalize these discussions, because here's the thing I'm not afraid of. I'm not afraid of my ability to go recreate it ever, but I also don't want to have to recreate it forever. Right? And that's the dynamic that it's shifting all of my focus, because one was a spending habit and two was I didn't have the same foundational knowledge I had or could have had that would have allowed me to forego the storm of losing a lot of it in the building of new things as well. And both are disciplines, both are elements of lessons, but both require a strong foundation of understanding.
And I have found that people who, I'm not going to say your money came too easy, but when money comes easy, they get a bit complacent. They don't plan for the storm. And the reality is every single one of us is going to face storms.
Yep.
They're going to come in different ways and at different times. And if you build a good solid foundation, you can weather a storm. It's not that big a deal. But if you don't, life becomes hard. And in today's society, it's even worse. Parents force their kids to go to these colleges with massive tuitions, and then they leave them stuck with an anchor of a debt. And that can be overcoming for a lot of people.
And not everybody has the ability that I have realized is both a gift and a learned skill, which is to be able to go sell ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Like when you look at all of the debt that so many people acquire in the educational process, they aren't actually given the foundational skills to go actually pay off that debt, right? The reason that I don't worry is because what I've always had going for me is I'm good at making and attracting money. Right. And yet I'm not as good as other people. So I'm still learning in that respect. But to your point exactly, right? I was diligent. I was careful. And even before I left my last business, I did a 7-year cash flow projection. However, things went astray and I didn't see all of the variables and I didn't have enough of let me put it this way. I had enough of a nest egg that we didn't lose everything, but we could have. Right. Had I not had certain pieces in place. And that's what I'm trying to highlight as well is it's like, yeah, I'm still learning consistently today, but I would rather the ability to be able to go replace and build and grow over having to be in some level of fixed income and have to figure out how to adjust everything into it.
There's more choices than that.
I agree.
I say that because I deal with business owners all the time, and where I fight against them is they all want to let's just go generate more sales. And I'm like, whoa, before you generate more sales, let's make sure that every sale you generate is profitable.
Agree.
And so that's where there's these other
Yes.
nuances to it of saying, yes, let's make more money. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're not giving up your life and your soul.
Correct.
And let's make sure that there's a proper value proposition.
100% agree with you. And so the example of the two extremes is like everything I talk about, right? It's if we go to the extremes, we miss the gift in the gray area, which is all of it. That wasn't my intent, but you're right. I mean, that's what I had to reset and re-understand. I had to understand the operational costs in my business. I had to understand where and what the ROI was on my marketing expenditures. I needed to know the most profitable lines of business that we had. I needed to understand where and how I wanted to restructure stuff so that for the time and energy and effort that I wanted to invest or the team structure that I wanted, we could actually build it in a maintainable way. That was where I did not apply in the building of new things, the principles, because I didn't have to in my prior world, because I had other people in the team that could do it, right? And so I just had to go build, I had to lead, I had to create. I didn't have to worry about all the people getting paid, all the everything taking place, right? I had partners that did that. So 1,000% agree with you. Those were the pieces that I learned. And yet I think that applies both on the business side and on the personal front, right? When I say I don't want a fixed number that I have to fit everything into, that's the extreme of like, I just don't want a single form of income as an employee. I want variability and opportunity, but that doesn't mean that I don't want a fixed budget that I manage to and allow the excess to grow beyond, right? That's a different mentality. And so exactly agree with you.
Yeah. And those are the exact topics we discuss on the other podcasts. Because for most business owners, they actually don't understand the business of business. And it's kind of shocking to me, but that's another day, another story.
No, totally.
There was another point you made about your parents. And I thought it was interesting because I know our kids used to fight us on this. They wanted you to be treated equally, paid equally. And with our kids, we believed in unequal. We believe that you'll get what you need and what's appropriate. But just because I buy you a laptop for Christmas doesn't mean I'm buying you the exact same dollar amount. I'm like, you didn't need it, so you weren't getting it. Over time, it's going to normalize, right? Because there are different things. But, then the kids start looking at you. I'm like, hey, this is what you asked for. This is what you needed. This is what you got.
Yeah.
We're not playing this game.
Yeah.
So we tried to do that as much as possible.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I really don't believe that the pure intent on their side was to have everything be equal all the time, but that was how it felt and how it was communicated, right? Or at least how I received it. And so you're exactly right. I mean, it's compressing one and almost putting a higher expectation on another, or both, right? And so it's an interesting dynamic. We try to raise our kids similar to how you just described, right? Is almost equal opportunity, right? But not necessarily equal outcome. And each kid is different. They have different needs, different requests, different ways of negotiating it, right? Like, great example. My son is 11, and this year he wanted a couple of really, really big things for his birthday, for example. And even those are negotiations at this point because we're having conversations, right? And it's like, well, what's most important to you for your birthday? And he's listing out both things that he wants and the experiences he wants. Then we're helping him evaluate, well, which ones of those actually are what you really want the most, right? Like, is it a party? Is it a big dinner with the whole family? Is it a bigger present and an experience? Is it like helping him really evaluate it? And his choice, he outgrew his last mountain bike, and his choice was, I want a brand new mountain bike, and I'm going to exchange the party, and we'll do a family dinner and do this, and I can get what I want for the mountain bike. And I was like, game on, bro, let's go. Now he's got a badass mountain bike, right? And I mean, it benefits me as well, but like it all was a discussion, and yet my daughter would select a party 10 out of 10 times over an item, right? And again, that's not right or wrong. It's just, we don't have to have it be equal. And I think that's where people get stuck in the system in general, is there's so much comparison and this belief that we've got to all be the same. It's like, no, if we learn the fundamentals and the concepts, we can apply it through our own unique lenses.
And I think that's a big part of it. Do it your way, but understand the value trade-off.
Yeah.
And then make a decision. Is this worth it? Because I'm going to guarantee you that you could put the same choices in front of us and we could all look at the price and the thing and say, well, maybe this for me. Someone else, I'm all in. And that's okay.
Yep.
And it's not my place to tell you that your value judgment's off. It's yours to do it your way.
Completely agree with you, my friend.
So it's cool. So we actually got to meet at an event that former guest Steve Sims, who does amazing things in his life. What attracted you to his group, and how'd you end up with Steve?
Yeah, I've known Steve now going on almost 5 years. We were introduced by a mutual friend about 5 years ago, and it was actually around the time I was exiting my last business and beginning this one full time. And we had some really like positive interactions early on, but he was one of those people that made me just enough uncomfortable that I liked it. And I mean that in the sense that like he and I have developed a really positive relationship, but he has a knack for challenging. And yet at the same time, at that time with where I was with my own ego and armor, I couldn't receive all of it for what it was. And I was skeptical and I didn't completely trust. And I don't think he did with me either, because I was communicating big energy through all this armor. And in this process of discovery for myself. So why I say all that is we didn't do a whole lot. And I had an opportunity to go to one of the speakeasies, which was the event that you and I met at. And it was, I want to say September, October of 2020. It might have been the spring of 2021. I don't remember, but it was right in that same 6 to 9 months that we met. And the only reason I went was not because I was interested in the event, but it was because I wanted to see him, meet him in person, because he's one of the few percentages of people that I could not get the exact read I wanted virtually. And that was all we had up until that point, right? In the beginning of 2020. And so I went to his event and he was exactly who I thought he was. And I've been all in ever since. Now, when I say all in, for me, it's all in the friendship and the relationship. So we've done a bunch of shows together. We've made a ton of introductions to each other over the years. We have always found ways to try to add value and support. I have gone to a number of these speakeasies, and it led to me being asked to be one of the founding members of the launch of the distillery, which is the mastermind that he and Henry launched 18 months ago. And, he is one relationship that I can tell you that the value is not measured even close to just on money. However, if it was, he is somebody that I am deeply loyal to for a very long time, because I think that he has a very strong filter and we attract and help a lot of the same people. And he's somebody that I will confidently, as well as receive confidently from him, edification of each other in the ways that we both know we can complement each other's worlds and abilities as people. And so that's how I got to meet you. Is I've stayed involved with a community that I believe in, and person and a man that's become a friend and somebody that I also admire as a leader.
Yeah, he's done amazing things. I think I learned about, he was a guest. Ramit used to have a brain trust way back when, and he was one of the guest speakers during that brain trust. So that's gotta be, for me, over 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Maybe longer. And then, followed him a little bit. And then we kind of fell out in the sense that, he goes his way, I go my way. And then we got reconnected when he came back on the podcast. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is cool. You're doing cool things. It's amazing that that whole circle came back again. And here we are.
Totally. And I think that stuff typically happens the way it does. And, knowing Steve too, he would hate that we just gave love and admiration to him. So I think that out of respect for him, we need to remind the world that he's a gruff biker that tries to run his business like a gangster and really somebody that operates more like a party planner or something like that. He's going to call you out. He's going to call you names. He's going to tease you about the shit that you're doing. But I love the man no matter what. He's a big gummy bear. So,
hey, they got a full hour plus of him on here. So they know all about him.
He's amazing.
Of course,
I love it.
He was loving on himself, so that's fine.
Oh, he does a lot of that. He'll edify himself all day long, man. That guy can sell himself into a corner.
You said something interesting. You said you had big energy with armor.
Yeah.
What was that all about? Where did that come from?
Yeah. So, I think it's probably relevant to bring in some of the history of the story because the armor got developed very thick over years and not just because of one thing. But, when I was 7, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn from my body. It was reattached, 24 surgeries. And that part in and of itself is one thing, but it's all of the narratives, the beliefs, the restrictions, the shame that was acquired, the lack of emotional healing that developed over years that ultimately developed this thick layer of armor. I came out of the hospital, nobody believed me. So I started off with this concept that, literally people would ask me what happened and I've got a teddy bear in between my arm and a sling and I'd tell them and then they'd pause and they'd look to my parents for validation, right? They didn't believe me. I was limited by people immediately through what they weren't capable of seeing in themselves in my situation, right? Telling me all the things I was going to do and not going to do. And so I formed this really strong mindset, which ultimately was armor. I believed that it was mental toughness, but it didn't have the depth to it. It was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And I proved to myself and to others over the course of those next periods, I was going to perform. I was going to do those things. But what does that also mean? I learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance. It meant it was always contingent upon what I did, right? And so I look at it today and the group or the category of people that I would tell you that I historically had the biggest challenges with, or I felt the most insecure, was often type A, competitive, hard driving males, right? Guess what? I fit that definition, right? But what's interesting is it wasn't because it was conflict. I often felt this insecurity, but I teach this concept around when we protect ourselves, we disconnect ourselves. We talked about it earlier. And it comes through this belief that we all seek and desire 4 things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to feel connected. But the second we don't feel protected, seen and understood, or connected, what do? We protect ourselves. So it's almost like imagining picking up that 35-gallon black trash bag and instead of opening it up to put stuff in it, holding it up in front of you like that armor, right? And then it's, well, how could I properly expect anybody to see who I am, what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, my heart, my intent, my soul, my desires, my boundaries, my value, my worth, delivered through this opaque force field? And that assumes that they're not carrying their own that's going to further dilute the message, right? So at the end of the day, I have a big energy. I know I have a big energy. I have a big presence. It's palpable. I could sit here and tell you that it wasn't true for the sake of trying to communicate this with humility. But I don't say that with ego. I say that with it's also led to a lot of people misunderstanding me being very disconnected, often having my energy communicate something that wasn't congruent to my intent, right? And so big energy delivered through armor, people don't trust. Guess what? That dynamic with those type A, hard charging, confident males, they felt threatened by me because they didn't understand what my energy was communicating because it came across as arrogant, conceited, right? I was there to be right or to be in control. And that's not my intent, nor has it ever been. But in my insecurity, in my level and attempt to protect myself unconsciously, to feel safety and security, right? To live and show up and feel like I'm a part of the crew, guess what? That gets covered with armor. And so that armor comes out with, not necessarily needing to spend $7,500 on the sport coat to have all the offset stitching and, the exact right fit, right? Or the excess money that I would spend on vehicles or certain things that had nothing to do with my own interests and simply to show that I was successful. That's armor as well, right? And so big energy delivered through armor, people don't trust. And so I had to learn that the hard way, right? I know that my energy is and can be extremely safe and can be extremely trustworthy. That's often who and what I'm associated with in terms of the environments that I enter and the feeling that I leave people with. I know that now. I can own that. Again, no ego in it. But that's also because I've had to learn to completely live unprotected, to lower my own armor, to truly allow like my heart to be what leads, because that's going to communicate more clearly than any words ever will. And it's something I teach today, but it's something that I still work on a daily basis, because the world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will only ever judge you based on your actions and behaviors, or what people believe your actions and behaviors communicate. And so if I'm not being seen in alignment with my intent, then I have to question my actions and behaviors. If I'm not getting the answers to what I want, I need to change my questions. And that's how I've lived my life, is learning to evolve and I guess shed those layers of protection that I no longer need.
Do you think most people are carrying protection?
Most are. Mm-hmm.
Do most people know they're carrying protection?
Not in the way that I described it. I think most people can be aware of the fact that they may be guarded or more reserved, and it would be described that way. But I don't believe that they understand often how their actions or their energy or their behaviors are communicating that, which often will come across as armored and guarded. And so, it's like when you meet new people, when people are real, raw, authentic, like instantly, right? Like we know the difference. We know when somebody's got an agenda, right? Or when they're attached to like driving the conversation somewhere, or if they want something from us instead of for us. We know. We can feel it. It's energy, right? Like we all do. We all have a read on that stuff. We know if somebody is interested or engaged in our conversation or whatever connection's happening, or if they're distracted in the moment because they're constantly looking at their phone or looking around the room. Like all of that translates in some form or fashion as guard and armor. And I think largely people live unconscious to that reality.
I know I did. That's why I asked.
I did too. I did too.
I think it was eye-opening to go, oh crap, I didn't realize I was doing that. And then you start to see it, and then it's like, wow. And then it's, kind of undoing it. And I know you talk about this, and for me, it's been the same way. Embrace the pain.
Yeah.
This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must-listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform.
I'll share just for the listener's perspective, because you've heard me say this, but I haven't mentioned it today. I've personally experienced all of these things in such a profound way that it rattled me to my cage, to my core, to my soul. My wife and I, less than a year after I executed my buy, sell on my last business to go do coaching and help people get to the core of who they are and impact who they want in this world in a really profound way. Less than a year after that, my wife told me that things I'd done, ways I'd shown up, patterns I'd still created had caused her to lose who she was. Like it was a dagger to the heart. And we started to unpack that there were these hidden layers of anger that I didn't even know were anger. I never associated as an angry person. I didn't know, despite her attempts to bring it to my attention, I didn't feel or associate anger, but it would show up in moments like this. She'd say, "Hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend?" But my shame and my anger filter would almost always hear it this way. "Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently. So what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend?" Not what she said, but that's what I heard. And that's what every cell in my body is reacting to, right? Now I'm in a protective zone because now I'm defensive and that armor is up. Why? Because I'm a great husband and father. And what do? I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last few days to show her I'm a good husband and father. That wasn't even what she asked, right? And the number of times that I started to unpack and realize that my intent was not being received through the way I was communicating it or what my actions or energy were communicating. And the number of times I also was not even hearing with accuracy and truth what was being said to me. And this isn't just in my personal relationships. This would happen in my businesses and in every area of my life. And yet here's the thing. 99% of the world didn't believe I was an angry person either, which meant I contained it so much that it was only my wife and my kids. And here's the reality. Like the idea that I had to accept that I would have done anything other than keep my wife and my kids safe and secure and protected almost crushed me. Because it was so far out of my belief system of how I was operating, but yet I was almost going to lose everything and everyone as a result of what I didn't even see for years. And so I'm really happy you brought that point up because it is important. And again, as I sit here and talk about it, I've been on this journey for 13, 14 years with deep level of intention and with deep level of purpose. And I sit here in a completely different perspective in my family and business today. However, I was unconscious to it for decades.
Beyond unconscious, what I notice is filling in the blanks. And what I mean by that is you see something and you want it to be a certain way. And so you make it the certain way.
There's
right?
truth to that as well. Yeah.
And it's along those same lines. And it is very unconscious because it's like your mind is programmed and you're following the programming that your mind is programmed to see and look for.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want, a white Mercedes, you'll see it everywhere. And even if it's a yellow Mercedes or, it'll become a white Mercedes. Or maybe it's a white BMW that now becomes a white Mercedes, right? And you start seeing what you want to see, even if it's not there.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot. And, that's kind of a little bit of an aha to me I'm always like, are these people blind? And it's like, oh, they're all running this pattern of they see what they want to see.
Well, and to that point, for a while towards the tail end of this period before I stepped into truth and reality and repair, believed that my wife was a weak person. It crushes me to even admit that publicly, that those were internal thoughts that I had, because my wife was the first woman I was ever with that pushed back. Meaning like I felt the challenge and I was like, whoo, I like that, right? But then towards the tail end of this, I was so convinced that like this was all fabricated and made up and it wasn't happening and I wasn't creating damage and like she's just complaining and she like all these narratives that filled into it, and it was also in all the areas that I didn't see. And here's the other truth. As ashamed as I am to admit that I ever had those moments of belief, it also reinforced the other side of it, which is my wife is one of the strongest people on this fucking planet. Because she endured 14 years of me in an unconscious state with my giant energy that can infuse life into people, but flipped on the other side can be just as damaging, right? And for her to have chosen to love me through all of that, for her to have seen who I am and my intent despite all of what those actions communicated over all of those periods of time, like I'm now grateful to reflect on the fact that I don't think there's another human being that could have walked with me through this journey and held her own strength and spine in the process.
She knew she had some work to do and she just set out to do it, right?
And she did. Yeah. I was just a lot longer of a project than she was expecting, I think.
Hey, everything is like that, Everything
it
takes
is,
twice as long and twice as much and
it is
twice as hard. That's just life.
I know.
You just got to stick it out. That's all. And I think a lot of this is, there's two parts to this. There's self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And then it comes back to who are you really? At your core, who are you?
Yep.
And are you willing to be that openly? And I think a lot of people feel covered up.
I think there's a lot of people who don't even know they're covered up. I mean, the number of people that I work with that, for the first time in their 40s, 50s, or 60s are realizing that they've lived their entire lives based on the standards and expectations and paths that were outlined for them, like didn't even realize all the reasons that they were living into certain things, right? Or that they've never given themselves permission to actually explore or ask those questions or to do any of that kind of work, right? And so oftentimes it's really interesting too, you can see lack of congruence in people's lives based on what they say their stated values and again what their actions and behaviors communicate to the world, right? Where they're spending time, where they're spending their energy, where they're spending their focus in general. And is there alignment even in what your stated values are and what your lived experience is? Right? There's a big disconnect for a lot of people because we are so conditioned. And we're not often taught to really step into and get clarity on who we are and what we want, right? What actually matters to us as individuals, to find ways to bring those things into our lives. And again, to do the work down the path of like realizing we can live our lives based on our standard, our terms, our belief systems. We don't have to be a product of the patterning.
I think part of the issue, though, is if you build up armor around you or a wall around you, you can't see what you really want. You tend to say, I want what's been shown to you or what has been portrayed as being the thing you should want.
I agree, but you can feel that you don't have it.
You
even
can feel
if
you
can't,
don't have
even
it.
if you can't communicate that you don't, or that you don't understand where the gap is. I think that's where it shows up for people, is the feelings and the emotions of lack or gap, or if they're spending more time in that low frequency energy and emotion than they are on the positive side. Like it truly is staggering and amazing to me how much people will almost be apathetic in accepting the lower frequency of life.
Well, I think they're probably unaware. It's funny because our tagline when I started this show was, you got rich, now what?
Yeah.
Because you got wealthy, you have all the money, there's no freaking excuse for you to have a sucky life, and yet your life isn't perfect.
Yep.
So there's only one problem in the picture.
Bingo.
And it's the reflection in the mirror. So what are you going to do about that?
100%. I mean, that's no different though than my story and my journey. I mean, that's what even started it. At 27, my prior business was 10 million in revenue. We were growing. My bank account was full, but I found myself empty. Right. Mm-hmm. And I had all the external things that I thought I wanted, but yet there was still that void or that gap in the things that really mattered most, or the way that it was showing up in alignment in my life. And now what's interesting is, again, though we are not in the dire state that we once were, trying to escape losing everything, we are still back in a rebuild period. And what's funny is I have everything that matters to me in all of the ways that matter. And money isn't even an indicator for me anymore. It's not even a measuring stick. It's something I focus on around creating wealth and making sure I don't repeat the same patterns and all the other components that are important. But what's funny is whether the money's here or not, my happiness doesn't depend on it, when at one point that was all I was chasing. Right. And yet that's what I had to surrender to almost 2 years ago when I was struggling to make cash flow, when I was leveraging debt like crazy because my operational expenses were too high and we hadn't right-sized the business 2-3 years ago. Right. When I was afraid that we were going to lose all these things, I had to have that like real conversation with myself that I was living in daily physical pain for nearly 31 years. I'm going on 23 months with virtually zero pain, essentially zero pain. My wife and I have been together now 18 years. We hid from each other unconsciously for 14. She's only felt emotionally safe with me for 36 months. But we have the best relationship, the most intimacy, the greatest health and conversation between each other, the most involvement she's ever had in our business. We've reversed generational patterns in our home. I'm deepening the relationships with my kids. Like I'm joy. I live in joy. I live in freedom. I live in fulfillment. I get to live in congruence at such a level that life is flowing in a way that it never has in the past. And again, whether the money is there or not, all those things remain to be true. And so 2 years ago, as I'm looking at the end of my financial investments running out, I had to really be honest with myself around what is it that I care about absolutely most? Because I've been so privileged to have access to so many things and so many experiences. Now that all of it seemingly was about to be sacrificed, this was the test to see what did I care about most. And being a husband and father is the only thing binary in my world. And if my health is there and I have freedom and access to my time, I have freedom and access in my relationships. Well, here's the reality. Money comes and goes. With a stronger foundation, we can keep it longer and help it amplify and grow itself. Those are skills I didn't have before. But at the end of the day, like wealth is beyond just monetary riches for me. It's time, relationships, health, and money. If I've got the other three, money's going to follow because I know how to attract it and build it, right? Now it's a matter of, can I keep it? And that's now the next evolution.
And that's a whole different skill set, as we said at the beginning. Keeping money is not something we are taught. And as a matter of fact, and we talked about that, at the very beginning of this show, and not this episode, but whenever we started 7, 8 years ago, everything is designed for you to spend money. Nobody is rooting for you to hold on to a penny. And you're alone in that one. And there are so many societal things that you don't even notice that are all just designed to get you to let go of it. Now,
how do you help people not be or feel so alone in that game? Because that was the one piece that jumped out at me, is like you are alone in the sense that you've got to understand what this looks like for you and surround yourself with the systems and the people to put this in place. But how do you help people work through that reality of like they are alone in understanding what their financial future could or would look like in alignment with what they desire?
It's not my work, but I will say this. There are groups out there now that are very aligned to, hey, if we can build enough of a nest egg, we have freedom. And I'm not talking about a massive nest egg, but if you have a little bit of a nest egg and your boss is an ass, F you, I'm out of here, right? Yeah. If you have a little bit of a nest egg, when the car tire blows out or the heat goes out, it's like, well, that sucks, but it's not a stress. I think it's just the awareness that, hey, and the way I explain it, I walk into Costco, I see the latest 80-inch TV. I'm like, ooh, 80-inch TV, baby. Got to get me one of these. Then it's the other half. But wait, if I don't make these choices, I have freedom. I don't have to worry. I sleep at night. I don't have to go to work. my 65-inch TV works for right now. I think I want you have to have the countermeasure, and most people don't have the countermeasure.
It's the want versus really need mentality, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm one of those that really thinks that every person, it's in their best interest to understand their fundamental needs. Like, what is required? What do you need to support your life? Right? Like, and I don't mean quality of life. I mean, what is needed in order to survive in your life? Quality of life is the second measure, right? That goes on top of that. But I think then I want everybody to want for as much as they possibly can and desire. But living into wants while understanding what your needs are, it's a very different mentality. I lived into a lot of my wants, right? And I didn't pay attention to the needs and that evaluation that we even articulated as it related to the conversation with my son. And so when did you start to realize, this is what I'm curious about, because you teach on a variety of things. When did you realize the want versus need dynamic for yourself?
So here's what happened. I was always from the time I was young, I wanted to be a millionaire. So I always studied money. Now, behavioral psychology with money wasn't around.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the lesson I learned. It wasn't a good lesson, but it helped me. We haven't seen this in a while either. See, normally every 7 years you hit a recession. We haven't in a while, and I think people have forgotten this. So you think about it, I'm growing up, I'm reading the Wall Street Journal, and every 7 years, it's the same damn story. Guy's 53 years old. He's living at the peak of his earning season. He's got a beautiful house. The kids go to fancy schools. He lost his job in the recession through no fault of his own, and his entire life crumbled.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I will never be that person. I'm like, okay, how much money do I need to not crumble? How much do I need to put away today and every month? And at what rate of return do I need to get to be able to do that? And I literally started doing that at 21.
Good for you.
And at 53, work started to go south. No recession, personal recession, we'll call it. And I pretty much said, you know what? I am going to choose my exit. I'm going to choose where I go and how I do it. And I'd already been planning it. So actually, it's funny because this story, the planning of the exit started 10 years ago this month. I was actually at Dave Ramsey's. I went down there to learn how to coach money.
Okay.
And it just showed up on my Facebook. Just the other day. And that's why I was like, oh, crap, that was 10 years ago. And there were two thoughts to that. One was, holy crap, look how far you've come in 10 years on that journey. And a little over 5 years ago, I quit work on my terms, said, screw you, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And I started the business. But I had done all that work before, during, and after that. Now it's actually, the entrepreneurial journey has been a big shift in when you know how to hunt, it's just a whole different way you feel.
Oh, totally.
And it's so different. So that's been a big learning. And I kind of learned those skills along the way. And the funny thing is, when I quit, because I knew what was happening, the companies hit a certain point where they start to lose revenue and they start to behave certain ways.
Yeah.
I said to him, you're not going to be here in 18 months. This whole place is, and he looked at me and he just couldn't believe it. About 6 months after I left, they had a little layoff. 18 months later, I think they had an 80% layoff in the area that I was. And I was like, not fun, dude. And I was so glad I had the courage to walk out on my terms, my way.
Yeah. Well, what you just outlined, though, too, is a point that we were talking about even early in the process with the answer to my relationship with money originally is this idea of pattern recognition, right? At the end of the day, to be able to break a pattern, you have to be able to see them in the first place, right? And what you just articulated, both in how you chose your investment philosophy early on, as well as your ability to study companies and the economy, it's pattern recognition. It's understanding the patterns and learning to adjust and refine to the patterns, and also be able to regulate ourselves throughout them. Whether it's the journey in breaking down shame and the trash from our past, or it's the journey of understanding financial investing, like at the end of the day, I think those that ultimately create the most freedom for themselves are the ones that can see the patterns first, to your point around awareness, and then have the ability to start to objectively and non-judgmentally deconstruct those patterns and then rebuild them to be in congruence with whomever or whatever they want it to create. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is patterns. My work with people is largely based in patterns. How I see things in folks, what I read in their faces and their nonverbals, right? It's patterns.
The other thing I learned is every 10 years, we're a different person.
Yeah.
And so you got to change your patterns to keep up with the new you.
Exactly right.
Question for you. As you see those things in people, do most people want to hear the answer?
I would suggest that there is probably a much larger degree of desire to hear the answer than may present in the first place. And why do I say that? I think that if people can receive the information in a place where they feel safe, where they feel protected, where they feel seen and understood, and they feel connected, and they are in a growth-oriented mindset, they want the info. The issue is that so often we are conditioned to defend ourselves from criticism, judgment, shame, right? And to view those things as if they're being used to harm you versus to provide insights. And so but that is also a fundamental truth that I focus on with the people that are in our world. You've come to community events, you've seen some of the stuff. Like I do hot seat coaching, and I'm really direct and bold with everybody. It's consistent, it's congruent, and the feedback isn't always the same. But what I always tell people is, whether it's in our groups or one-on-one, those that are going to get the most out of the work that I do are those who have a desire and the courage to find it and stand in their truth. Because if you have the courage to overcome the discomfort of what you might receive, right, in a moment, or you're willing to at least deconstruct the unconscious level of protection that goes into place when you perceive criticism or judgment, right? Because you've not been used to being in a safe and protected environment, then it's sometimes a learned experience for people to be able to receive it. But that's also one of the big reasons I don't just provide feedback willy-nilly to people. I mean, the very first time you and I sat down and talked, before I said anything in reflection to you, is I said, hey, do I have permission to give you some feedback? And you were like, oh yeah, why? And then what I did was I caveated it and I said, look, what I want you to understand is like, I don't care about being right. What I care about is getting it right for you. And so if anything I say doesn't land right, doesn't feel right, push it back, because it's going to give me information. Because what I have learned is what I'm picking up on typically leads to something. I just might not know right at the gate what it is. And I frame it all because why? I'm creating a safe environment. And if somebody is willing and offers and says, yes, you have permission, most of the time they say yes. But that's why I say I think most people desire that, is because I've learned now how to ask. And more often than not, people say yes. They want it and they receive it. But here's the difference. If I saw those things and I was like, hey, Rocky, I think you've got some hidden shame that's showing up as blocks and things that you're not seeing clearly right now. And I really think that you should look back at your early childhood because it likely points you towards some things. And you and I hadn't built any rapport and I hadn't asked for permission. You probably been like, who the fuck is this guy? Get out of here. Right? Like, because it is about context, relevance, credibility, and having that dynamic be real. So I gave you a long caveat to that answer, but I do believe that inherently we want the truth. It's just we aren't conditioned to receive it from a safe source.
Yeah, I'll give you one more caveat to this. And it's because I've been around a lot of coaches and programs and so forth. The people who come into your circle are the ones who are willing to step up.
Bingo.
And most people may or may not be willing to, and so they'll never come into your circle because it just doesn't happen.
It's the truth. Or they won't come into a public circle, but they'll do one-on-one work with me.
Well,
right?
that's different. Yes.
But I'm saying,
but
I think
they're still in your circle.
Yeah. But there's also truth in this. Like there are people that you and I both know. And I've been told this. I actually was just talking to somebody else earlier about this because again, this is about the self-awareness I need to have. There are people who literally will avoid me because even if I don't say anything to them, my presence often makes people feel things they don't necessarily want to feel. And I could take that as an offense, like it's something wrong with me, or I can realize that's a dynamic. But I've had clients who said, I saw you on stage 3 years ago and I literally avoided you. I knew I wasn't ready to do the work and I was terrified to come and talk to you, right? And others lean right in. And there's different entry points for that. But that's also the truth though, is I believe that I can only be as good as those who are willing to step up because it's about putting it into action, right?
Yes. Their mind already made up a story that you were unsafe. And so no matter what you do, their mind is, well, stay away from Brian. He's unsafe.
Yes. And it's unsafe because to them, feeling those things is unsafe.
Correct.
Right? And not necessarily that I myself am unsafe, but that the environment around me isn't comfortable always. And that's okay. But that's something I've had to learn as well, because just like I say, feedback is always permission-based. Just because I do see everything with a lot of people, and I don't mean that means I'm right, to be clear, but I don't miss a lot. And I've learned that and I can own that. It makes friendships potentially complicated unless people can be very okay transitioning, because I don't go at my friends and coach them. I don't try to coach my wife. I don't try to coach my kids.
Smart.
Right? Like, well, I learned that the hard way because early when I started, 10 years ago when I started my coaching practice, she came up with this term within like weeks and she's like, don't you Brian Bogert me. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So then I stopped. But the point is like, if I'm not really careful at understanding those boundaries, and if I'm not consistently in a place where I'm seeking permission, like I'm not in a place where I just want to go coach and fix and tell people things because I want to do that. Like it's got to be the right place, the right time, the right scenario, which is also why I can blend in a room at the distillery and other places. Like I can be social, I can have fun, I can laugh, I can crack jokes. Like I don't always have that zone and that hat on. However, I just know that my mere presence, even with good friends, is that way. So I was on a reconnect with a close friend that literally avoided me for the last year. He's like, ironically, you're the person I probably needed the most. But he's like, I also knew you were the person that was going to hold the most accurate reflection up for me. And I wasn't ready to look in the mirror. I was like, okay, right?
We talked about looking in the mirror before, didn't we?
We have. Yeah, we've talked about that.
And, you know, it's funny because of the way I'm wired. I want to look in the mirror. And to me, not wanting to look in the mirror is just so outside of my programming system that I can't even understand it. I'm like, wait, what? You don't want to get better? You don't want to fix this? You don't want to do that?
It doesn't make any sense to me. Like when you can see opportunity for either growth or removal of pain or suffering, why you wouldn't make choices to walk down that path. Like it doesn't. But I had to let go of that because as a coach, I would often get into situations where I would care more than they did. And I have to be careful with that, right?
That you do. So there's one question that I find most people can't answer. And I'm not looking for a numeric answer. Okay. How much is enough? And I'm not looking for you specifically.
No, I think I can answer. I would like to answer that question because I've taught this concept, at least in the way that I believe it. For a long time, I shamed myself for wanting more. Right? It was like that was the whole question in the initial rise in my business is like, when is enough enough? When is enough enough? When is enough enough? It depends on what we're measuring. Right? To your point, it doesn't have to be a number. Here's what I believe. I have enough, am enough, and have accomplished enough up until this exact moment. But there's more time in the rest of the day. There's more in the week. There's more in the year. Like, to your point, if I am a new person every 10 years, if I recognize 7-year cycles, if I see all these things, then is what is enough for me today enough for me tomorrow? Right? Like I am very grateful. I'm satisfied. Right? I am happy and content with exactly how my life is in this moment. But I also desire more. I desire more financial freedom than I've allowed myself on the tail end of not having the disciplines early in life. Right? I desire more depth in my relationships with my kids, with my wife. I desire more impact in the work that we do. And I don't understand why anybody in today's world would ever shame more. But there's a big difference between being unsatisfied and feeling incomplete or empty in your current state and always chasing that empty hole and recognizing that I am actually currently full, but tomorrow my capacity goes up. My lifeline is longer. I have more experience, more wisdom, more understanding. A year from now, 10 years from now, the same thing is true. And so for me, when is enough? Well, it is enough for me currently. But until the day that I no longer wake up, the way I live my life, just like you said, I love to look in the mirror and I want to ask those questions. I am not the best version I believe I'm capable of for however long I'm going to live, even though I'm as self-actualized and as good as I can be in this moment.
I like it. I find a lot of people just continue to chase money because they don't know anything else, and it's their only measuring stick, and they miss all the other parts that
I agree with you completely
too. And so there is that whole big part of it that that's kind of out there.
Yeah, I agree. And at the end of the day, I think that's often why it's so important for me to do the work that I do, is because I believe that if we can remove the shame and blame from our lives, from our relationships, from our health, from our financial riches, from the way that we learn and grow, then all we have is opportunity and growth potential. Right? And I mean that in every category. But it's also about getting clear and finding that clarity. And I often believe that clarity can be accomplished either through confirmation or challenge. And so are you putting enough out into the world and doing enough work inside to be able to test the congruence around that clarity? And are you getting more confirmation or more challenge? And what is it pointing you to?
Always get feedback.
It's time to learn the secrets of life.
What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Being as present as possible in every single moment.
That's not easy. I get distracted a lot.
It can be very challenging, but it can also be a learned skill.
That it is. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
That human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. And shutting off any type of pain, in my case, physical, also shuts off every kind of pain. So you have to feel in order to heal.
Yeah, you have to go through it, right? The obstacle is the way. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Get clear on who you are. Learn to love who you are. Learn to advocate for who you are. And learn that unconditional love and abundance is available to everybody. If you can master those 3 or those 4 concepts, the first 3 being the priority, then you can love others for who they are. You can advocate for others for who they are. And you can unconditionally love and provide opportunity to everyone else.
I don't think they have those classes in high school.
They don't. No, they don't. I don't think they have them in college either. But ironically, it's the most important stuff we can learn.
That it is. If people would like to learn about you, your coaching, where can they find you?
If you're on the web, you can go to brianbogert.com. We run challenges, have lots of freebie information, lots of educational resources, and different pathways to engage. And if you are on social media, we are at Bogert Brian on every channel. We're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible by reducing the level of suffering that exists on this planet. And I say that very clearly because 99.9% of those people will never pay us $1. I believe moved people move people. I just want to move as many as I can. So if you were moved by anything in this episode, take a step, take an action, and go see how much more you can move yourself and move others.
I encourage you to go check it out. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate you, brother.
Where are you with holding on to your past? Are you even aware? I wasn't for the longest time. It's a journey to let go, to see ourselves clearly, and to do the work so we can truly be who we were designed to be, and to be comfortable with ourselves. Are there some areas you need to dive into? Check out his work or check out many of our other guests. I've worked with many of them. Next week, we're going to have another entrepreneur on, Seth Spears, to share his inner journey. You're going to start to see how all these things cross over, these paths cross, these connections get made. But you got to get out there. You got to do it. Otherwise, it ain't going to happen. By the way, do you know someone who might benefit from today's episode? Would you do me a favor and share it with them? I would appreciate that. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.